What's up, guys? It's Dan from Coin Bureau Trading. Today, we're going to take a look at whether Solana has seen most of its gains for this cycle and whether Sol is going to start underperforming. Some of you might know that this is kind of like a narrative that's been going somewhat viral in the last few weeks and months. A lot of people think that the top for Sol is in and that it's going to underperform, kind of like Ethereum did during the last cycle. Spoiler alert, I think that this is completely wrong, and I'll explain why in detail in today's video. If this is the kind of content that you enjoy, then be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ping that notification bell. Before we get started, do keep in mind that nothing in this video is financial advice. It's just my personal analysis of the market, in this case of Solana. Your analysis could be different, and if it is, that's awesome, because the more difference of opinion that we have, the better traders and the better investors we're all going to become. So with that being said, guys, I want to start off here with the ETH BTC chart. For those of you who don't know, ETH BTC, or like any BTC chart for that matter, it basically measures the strength of an altcoin relative to Bitcoin. And of course, ETH has been massively underperforming Bitcoin now for like almost 2 or 3 years. It's basically at a lowest level on ETH BTC in God knows how many years. I think like almost 5 years now. Like, it looks absolutely brutal. And so basically what this shows you, again, this is not looking at ETH in fiat terms, but it's looking at ETH in BTC terms. And basically what this means is that ETH has basically been outperforming, that BTC has been outperforming ETH, and that ETH has basically not been doing so hot, which of course we all know. And of course, a lot of people have been looking at the Sol BTC chart, and they're starting to see parallels between the ETH BTC chart. So again, to go back here, we're on the weekly here, by the way, guys, on both. So you can see we almost kind of have like let's say like a head and shoulders pattern here from the 2017 cycle. Then you see kind of like basically like a peak that's not as big, and then like a slow grind lower. And everyone was kind of looking here. It's like, hey, I also kind of see a head and shoulders. I see kind of like a peak, and it looks like that Sol's going to start grinding lower. And basically what that would mean in practical terms is that most of Sol gains are in, and that it's basically not that it's all over, but that basically if you didn't get into Solana before, then you kind of missed the boat, and now it's kind of too late, and Sol is going to underperform and whatever. And of course, this is the narrative now. And of course, in the last few months, because Sol hasn't been doing too hot, everyone just thinks it's going to be like this forever, and they're looking for parallels between the previous cycle and the current one. Just as a quick side note, guys, I need to say that I find it very funny that there's so many people that are comparing the current cycle to the previous one and looking for parallels there, when the previous cycle was kind of abnormal by all accounts. I explained why in my video last week. I won't get into the details here, but anyways, of course, when we're looking at, again, ETH BTC, Sol BTC, we can see the parallels, but again, the charts don't tell you everything, and this is something that a lot of crypto analysts forget. To understand, or I guess to answer the question of whether Sol is going to underperform, we have to ask the question of why did ETH underperform in the last cycle? Of course, a lot of people were expecting ETH to go higher here, for it to, let's say, I don't know, go up to 0.13 or whatever, 0.15 against BTC, and for ETH to hit a fiat price of somewhere around $10,000. Those of you who were around in the previous cycle will know that this is a target that a lot of people were watching. ETH got up to around, I don't know, whatever it was, around 5,000, right? And then it corrected down, and a lot of people were disappointed with that. And of course, that begs the question, why did ETH underperform in the last cycle, and could Solana see something similar this time? The answer, I think, is no, and that's for the simple reason that the reason why that ETH underperformed in the last cycle, guys, you might remember, is because basically ETH was the #1 chain for DeFi and NFTs. Of course, those were like the two biggest narratives, let's say, of the 2021 cycle. And of course, what happened is that fees on Ethereum got crazy, and the result is that you had a lot of alternative layer ones emerging that also support the EVM, like Avalanche, like Polygon, which is technically a side chain and not a layer 2, as a fun fact, like a Phantom. You saw exchange chains like BNB, like with the Binance Smart Chain, and Harmony, right? And the thing about all of these, let's say, alternative EVM chains is that they do not use ETH for fees. If all these alternative chains had been layer 2s, then ETH probably would have rallied up to, let's say, I don't know, 7,500 or 10,000 or whatever in the last cycle. One thing that a lot of people don't understand when it comes to Ethereum's layer 2s is, like, yes, they're using less ETH for fees, but the thing that, like, it's not the fees that drive demand for Ethereum, it's the fact that Ethereum is kind of used as collateral. It's used, for example, to buy NFTs or whatever on these layer 2s. But if obviously that's not the case for chains like Avalanche and Polygon and Phantom. They use AVAX, they use POL, they use FTM, and the result is that you have less demand for ETH. So long story short, again, the reason why Ethereum underperformed in the previous cycle, the reason why it looked like this, was basically because you had capital moving onto these alternative chains to do things like DeFi, to do things like NFTs, and all these chains had their own coins, so it did not drive any demand for ETH. It drove demand for AVAX, for Matic, for FTM, and that's why these cryptos, even like Harmony One, you guys might remember, these cryptos did exceptionally well. Like they rallied like crazy. Like they had like 50x, 100x gains, 300x gains, and that's because you basically saw direct competition, let's say, for Ethereum. So of course that begs the question: could we see the same thing here for Solana? And I actually think the answer is no, because in this cycle, or rather in terms of what's Solana's primary demand driver, of course that's meme coins. But before I get into that, I really quickly want to take a look at the Solana chart here. This is again on the weekly, and this is going to be, I guess, a little bit of a hot take on my end. What I actually think we're seeing here, guys, and some people might disagree, and feel free to disagree in the comments. What I look for when it comes to price action is I really like to look for parallels in patterns, right? I'm not really so focused on like levels and whatever, because this is all stuff that can be manipulated by leverage and whatever, right? And what really interests me about Solana's price action, let's say over the last 6 months, is that it looks very, very similar to what we saw in early 2021, which sounds crazy, right? Like, you look at this pattern, you're like, how could you think that this is just like a big, more amplified version of that? Well, I think that it is, like this pattern, again, it's not identical. And of course, I think it was worked by like, meme coin speculation and stuff around like Trump's meme coin, which I'll get to in a second. But this whole pattern here looks very similar to this. It does not look like like a bear market. It doesn't look like this at all, let's say. It doesn't look like the blow off top. This looks like a kind of a massive consolidation zone before the actual blow off top. And if you stick around, I'll kind of show you guys how high I think a Sol could go, and also show you some analysis from other traders that are really highly respected, like Bitcoin maxis, who can also see that Solana is going to go at least to like $500 to $700 at least. And I'll show you guys that again towards the end of the video. Of course, before we go any further, I do need to show the Coin Bureau deals page here a little bit. We have a 20% trading fee discount and up to $600 of bonuses on Binance, which we were just using. This is the biggest discount that you can get. It's available exclusively through the Coin Bureau. And when you sign up, you get a trading fee discount. We get a cut of the trading fees, and the exchange gets a new user. So it's a win-win-win for everyone. If you can't use Binance for whatever reason, then do check out the other deals we have there. Like on Arkham Exchange, for example, this is available to U.S. residents in select states. And we also have other exchanges that are available to other EU and UK users if you're having trouble signing up, let's say, to some of these exchange deals that we have. So check out those deals in the description before they run out. Anyways, back to the topic at hand here with Solana. So this is where things get really interesting, because again, the main thing that was driving the demand for ETH and basically the activity around ETH, and the reason why it lost market share, was because of DeFi and NFTs. In this cycle, when it comes to Solana, its primary demand driver has been meme coins. And then this is where things get up for debate, right? I personally think that we're going to see another meme coin wave. I actually think that Sol's primary demand driver going forward is probably going to be related to stuff like AI agents and just like altcoin speculation in general, just because Sol is the easiest chain to swap on. It's super cheap. You can swap super easily in Phantom. Like Phantom even flipped the Coinbase wallet at one point in the App Store, which is pretty crazy. So I do think that Solana is kind of emerging as like the de facto chain for like where people go to look for altcoins, and that's kind of like what's probably taken market share from Ethereum in this cycle so far. But all of that aside, let's just assume for sake of argument that you believe, what, I think the meme coin season is over. I think the launch of Trump's meme coin marked the top, and that's why, and I'm sure that you guys have heard this, is like, that launch of Trump meme coin, that like if it didn't mark the top for the market, then it definitely marked the top for Sol, because of course the launch of the Trump meme coin resulted in a lot of demand for Solana. So of course, if there's no more meme coin season, then Solana will underperform, and that's basically the fundamental reason why Solana would underperform. And of course, that I think there's no question that that's why it's been struggling over the last few months, is because we did see kind of like a drawdown, let's say, in meme coins, and no one's really trading meme coins as much as they were before. So let's just assume for the sake of argument, because I'm sure there's going to be lots of bears in the comments saying, well, meme coins are the primary demand drivers, meme coins are dead, so therefore Sol will underperform. What all these people are forgetting is that Solana, for a long time, actually since the last cycle, has also been angling itself towards payments. And if you actually go to Solana's website and you just scroll down a little bit, they will show you literally what they're focused on. And the number one thing here is payments. And you may think, okay, so what? Okay, yeah, like all these other cryptos, crypto payments, they've been talking about that forever. Well, some of you might remember that PayPal, of course, added support for Solana for its PYUSD stablecoin. PayPal, of course, is the largest payment processor in the world by some metrics, and this was last year, so they expanded to Solana, and you might think, so what, didn't do anything, like no one really cares. Well, earlier this year, PayPal announced that they're actually looking to basically not, I don't want to say force the adoption of their PYUSD stablecoin, but they're looking to grow the PYUSD stablecoin as much as they can. And of course, they're specifically targeting payments use cases with PYUSD on Solana. So obviously, PayPal's PYUSD push is going to drive lots of activity on Solana. And you might think, okay, well, how come this hasn't happened yet and whatever? Of course, the answer is stablecoin regulations, which we're still waiting for. Hopefully, those will come by the end of the month. I'm not holding my breath. I think it'll probably take a little bit longer. But once this stablecoin bill passes, then you will see PayPal really doubling down on PYUSD. And of course, they're not going to use Ethereum for those payments. They're going to use Solana. And again, like from an institutional perspective, if you're like some institutional investor or even a retail investor for that matter, the prospect that Solana would become the next payment rail for the world's largest payment processor, just let that sink in. Solana becoming the payment rail for the world's largest payment processor, okay? This is like what all these cryptos have dreamed of, like XRP and whatever, like they've all been hoping to like clinch that title. And Solana looks like, once this bill gets passed, that's probably the narrative that's going to come out for Solana. It's like, this is literally the next Swift, it's the next payments platform, it's the next whatever, right? I'm not saying that's going to happen, like that's going to be a specific narrative, but it's easy to see how that can happen. But let's say for sake of argument, you may say, okay, well, payments super cool, but maybe that'll drive some speculation, but it's not really going to drive any fundamental demand. Like the fees on Solana are really low, so it's not really going to like do anything, right? I'm playing devil's advocate here because I know there's going to be comments like that. So, and this is kind of like a question that I've even posed to people in the Coin Bureau Club Discord. How is Solana going to underperform when you have publicly traded companies literally buying billions of dollars of SOL in the next couple of months? So you have Sol Strategies, which raised 500 million here back in April. You have DeFi Development Corp, which also raised $1 billion back in April, and you have a whole bunch of other companies that are literally buying billions of dollars of SOL, the same way that like these big companies are doing with Bitcoin. What's interesting is we're not really seeing that with ETH. I suspect the reason is that these companies, they can buy Solana and they can stake it and has like a 7% yield or whatever. And whereas for Ethereum, it's only 3%, which is not necessarily that big of a deal. But again, if you don't think that there's going to be another meme coin season, then okay, then what about the payments? Don't you think the payments would be like a huge thing for Solana? And if you think no, I don't think so. I think it's just you're just hyping it up. Okay, sure. Okay, then how about publicly traded companies buying billions of dollars of SOL the same way that MicroStrategy has been doing with Bitcoin? And keep in mind, guys, like when you're talking billions of dollars of SOL purchases, you might think, oh well, we've heard the same thing for Bitcoin, but like Solana is like what, like 50 times smaller, like 100 times smaller than Bitcoin. Like it's way smaller. So like when you have billions of dollars going into SOL, that moves the needle way more than it does on something like Bitcoin, right? Because because Solana is so much smaller. But let's say for the sake of argument, no, I don't know, all these purchases are taking place OTC, so it's gonna have minimal effect on the spot price, and maybe it'll just offset some of the inflation, which we know Solana's inflation is high, and blah blah blah. Okay, sure. Let's move on to the next thing then, which is that the so-called PayPal Mafia, which of course, as we just discussed, PayPal's launching PYUSD on Solana. For those of you who don't know, there's like this group of basically ex-PayPal executives known as the PayPal Mafia, with like Peter Thiel and like David Sachs and Elon Musk and all these guys, and they're super involved in Solana's ecosystem. And especially when you combine this with like the stablecoin bills and like and these PayPal Mafia being involved in the Trump administration, you start to understand that like, wait a minute, like these guys are basically preparing to pump their bags like crazy, right? And this is just a little bit of a headline that I find really interesting, and something that I think a lot of people have overlooked is that back in December, Helios raised I guess almost $22 million here from a bunch of investors. One of the lead investors there was Founders Fund, and you might think, okay, well, what does this matter? What even is Helios? Helios is the largest validator on Solana. So the largest validator on Solana raised money from the Founders Fund, which I should have clarified is basically, I believe, affiliated or run by Peter Thiel, right, who's part of the PayPal Mafia. So you basically have PayPal Mafia guy funding the largest validator on Solana. You have PayPal launching PYUSD on Solana, and then as a cherry on top, you have of course David Sachs, which is Trump's crypto czar, who's also a Solana bull, and he apparently like divested from Solana and from Multicoin or whatever. But they have their ways of like maintaining their exposure, let's say, I'm sure. Like, I don't know what he's doing specifically, but we'll see. And again, here, David Sachs, member of PayPal Mafia, Trump crypto czar. And again, like you just look at like the connections to Solana in the Trump administration. It's like, this is crazy. And then you have PayPal coming out, with PYUSD payments on Solana. And of course, again, that's going to accelerate after we see these stablecoin regulations pass the next couple of weeks. We have publicly traded companies accumulating Solana. And then, of course, last but not least, we have the spot Solana ETFs that are coming probably sometime later in the year. And Bloomberg ETF analysts have those odds at 90% currently. I believe the final deadline is sometime in October for Solana. So again, this, objectively speaking, I think the setup here for Solana is completely different than what it was for Ethereum. Ethereum was not, on the brink of, let's back up. Ethereum was not really being used for payments because it's too expensive, right? Solana will be. Ethereum was not being accumulated by publicly traded companies in size. Solana is. What else? Ethereum did not really have close connections to key players in the Trump administration. Solana does. Ethereum is not really going to directly benefit, that much, let's say, from this stablecoin regulation, because again, like Ethereum is just too expensive. But Solana will benefit greatly. Of course, and then there's of course the spot Solana ETFs, which of course Ethereum did not have during the previous cycle. Those were launched, I think, sometime in 2023 or 24. Sorry, like my memory escapes me. It's a Monday morning. Please forgive me. But in all seriousness, like Solana has no shortage here of like different, basically like demand drivers and catalysts and connections and everything that could take Sol much higher. So in conclusion, I think looking at the Sol BTC chart and then comparing it to ETH BTC and thinking that history is going to repeat here, I think this is a mistake. And I think anyone who thinks this way is going to get seriously burned. And I do think that we're probably going to see a bounce in Sol BTC. And I do think it's going to head way higher and it'll probably surpass a new all-time high in BTC terms. I guess that's a contrarian take at this point. But again, given all these facts, and again, they are facts, this is not like a speculation thing. Well, maybe you could say with like the PayPal stuff, but even then it's like, is it really that speculation though when you see the money flowing, follow the money and so on. Um, anyways, so yeah, like I'm personally very bullish on Sol. Of course, I do hold Sol, and it's one of my larger positions. It's not that large. I think it's like 5 or 10% of my portfolio or something. But again, I see a lot of narrative and a lot of FUD around Solana, and I really want to come out there and basically say, you know what, I'm going to give my contrarian take here because I don't think that's accurate. Because again, the circumstances surrounding the Solana's underperformance, it's kind of more specific to market conditions rather than any competition coming and taking Solana's cake. Because again, I don't really think anyone's competing on the meme coin landscape. Solana has that, they have a monopoly there basically. I don't really see too many crypto projects competing on payments. Maybe like a Coinbase's base layer 2 might be one exception there, to be honest. But again, the base layer 2 doesn't have a token, and like, okay, yeah, there's Ethereum, but same idea. It's like it's not really gonna, move the needle that much, especially because Solana is so much smaller. And anyway. So of course, if you made it this far, then I'm sure you're wondering, okay, so then give us some targets here. I noticed this post here recently by Peter Brandt, which some of you might know. He's really big into Bitcoin, and he did a post recently, which is a little bit of, let's say, a tongue-in-cheek, and he was basically saying, like, do you prefer XRP or Sol? And he was kind of comparing the two charts here, basically showing that he thinks XRP will top somewhere around $4.5, but for Solana, he's angling here that he thinks it could be somewhere around, like probably $800 or $900. My personal target here is somewhere for Solana is somewhere just below or just above $1,000. Very simple reason. I think that's the target that everyone's going to be watching, and the result is that you'll see people front running that target, meaning that either people will be taking profit before $1,000, or you will see whales come in and push the price up above $1,000, so that all the people who sold below $1,000, they'll be like, oh my god, it's going higher. It's going to go to 1,500 or 2,000. I need to buy back in now, and so they're all going to ape back in at like 1,100 or 1,200, and then from there it'll like dump, right? So that's my personal target. That's my like thesis behind it. Again, no shortage of catalysts, no shortage of buyers, no shortage of different factors there. And I do think that, as a conservative target, and this is what Peter highlighted here, as a conservative target for Sol to hit somewhere around $500, I think that makes a lot of sense. But the thing is that during FOMO phases in the market, like when the markets are really taking off and you have all this leverage and everything, prices tend to surprise to the upside. So I do think that this $520 target for Sol that Peter has here, again, from a purely technical perspective, that would be the most logical, but I could see it going much higher than that afterwards. And specifically, if everyone's looking for specific timeframes, between probably end of June, I would say, is when you start to see things really picking up among altcoins more broadly. So end of June, let's say, to like end of August or end of September, somewhere in that time frame. Exact time frame TBD, depends on a whole bunch of factors. But over the summer, I do think that Sol is going to be up, $500, $700 range, approaching 1,000. And everyone who was saying that Solana was going to underperform and that Solana was dead and that like there's no chance it could compete or against like whatever other cryptos, I think they're all going to get washed out, and it's going to be very entertaining to watch. Anyways, if you guys did make it this far, then be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, ping that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one.